My name is Joshua Gibson, and you are listening to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, a show dedicated to promoting a message of critical thinking as it pertains to strength training, nutrition, and well-being. This is done through interviews with experts, high-level athletes, coaches, and people heavily involved in strength sports and athletic development. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and let's get on to today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm joined again by a return guest or weightlifting coach, weightlifter, Tom Sroka. How's it going, Tom?
What's going on, man? How you doing? I wouldn't put myself as a weightlifter. I answered that on IG the other day. Somebody asked if I was competing at Masters because I'm officially that at the start of January, and I am unofficially retired from weightlifting. But weightlifting coach, absolutely. But thank you for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for clarifying that. I think people will be surprised that you're still, even though you're unofficially retired, you're still one strong mofo.
Well, thank you. I didn't say I stopped training. I just I would, and I like the snatches and I like cleans. It's funny. Yesterday, for the first time in 4 years, I just started doing cleans again, full cleans. I was usually I really screwed up my hip when I was at MDUSA. That whole, going through the grinder type deal. Mm-hmm. And then I did grid after that, and that just caused more wear and tear on my hip. And I literally took about 4 years off of any sort of full cleans, full snatches, even full squatting without any, like a pair of light briefs on or something like that. And yesterday was the first time in almost about 4 years I was able to start doing full cleans, and they felt not terrible. I was able to walk today, so I'm probably going to start incorporating more of that stuff back into my training again. I enjoy the lifts. I think they're the most beneficial bang for your buck thing out there. But for a while there, my body just didn't agree with them. So I felt like it was a disservice to call myself a weightlifter of any kind. Strength enthusiast is what I joke around with people. Because I can't pick a sport, as people have probably figured out. Like I like to go lift stones. I was supposed to go to Norway over the summer and compete in a strictly stone lifting competition. Ended up not, obviously because of COVID. I do the Highland games, Moss wrestling. And then I this summer, because they were the only things going, I would do like some small strongman contests and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm more of a strength enthusiast.
Yeah, but I have noticed, and maybe these are older videos that I'm thinking of, but you've been hitting some huge muscle snatches though. I feel like you recently hit like a muscle snatch PR, or it might have been a triple or something.
Yeah, 120. I don't remember what I hit, to be honest. That was I programmed stuff in like 4-week blocks, and that was 2 training blocks ago. But yeah, I was just trying to do some capacity work, and yeah, it went way better on the muscle snatches. I think honestly, for any sort of an athlete, strongman, Highland games, whatever, I actually think the muscle snatch is the best training exercise over all the Olympic variations, simply because like when it comes to like Highland games, like throwing, you're not really catching anything, but that extension is key. And so a lot of my throwers, we do a lot of hang snatches, stuff from the power position, a lot of muscle snatches, stuff like that. My strongman guys that can't really do the lifts because they're, tighter than a boulder, they'll do some muscle snatch work because it just helps them work on that extension, stuff like that. But I personally love it when I'm getting back into Olympic lifting. That's usually one of the first movements I program for myself because and I can go pretty heavy on them and still get a good stimulus because it helps me kind of get ready to do snatches and cleans and stuff like that. So if I, put that in front of before a snatch block or a clean block, usually my lifts go pretty well, which hasn't failed me yet.
I guess we kind of skipped over the part where you introduce yourself and what you've done and where you've been. And we've recorded a podcast previously, and I think people can find it if they look hard enough. And you obviously deep dive into your background and your come up as a thrower, and then getting into weightlifting and going to Cal Strength and MDUSA. But I guess for people who are somehow averse to listening to that episode, maybe you could give us a quick background and kind of how you have gotten to the point where you're muscle snatching 120 plus and then running the strength agenda and teaching kids.
Yeah, sorry. So, I got started. I was a 3-time All-American shot putter in college. After college, I did the Highland Games, which the guys wearing the kills, flipping telephone poles. And then I got a call from the Glenn Pendlay, who a friend of mine, Ingrid Markham, had kind of passed my name along to because he was looking for weightlifters. He was out of Cal Strength at the time, and he invited me out there to San Ramon, California to try out lifting. I was kind of coaching throwers and working with kids and stuff at the time. So I'm like, hey, I don't know how to do a snatch. Which is why Ingrid reached out to him in the first place, because I was like no contact snatching 100 kilos in her studio gym. And so I went out there. I'm like, I'm going to learn from these guys. And I ran into a bunch of characters, Rob Blackwell, Spencer Mormon, John North, Donnie Schenkel. I shared a room when I was staying there that adjoined with Donnie's. Went out there for a week, learned how to snatch clean and jerk. Literally a week into training, Glenn added 10 kilos to each one of my lifts. And then when I came back, I had an invite to train at Cal Strength full time. So I literally quit everything that I was doing, packed up and moved. And then in May, the team split. We had the MDUSA Cal Strength split. I went with Cal Strength because Charlotte, North Carolina was closer to Chicago, which is where I'm from, than San Francisco was. And I was there until January of 2015. And then I left MDUSA. And then June of that year, I moved back to Chicago. Opened up my own gym, started out at Big Shoulders CrossFit, started working with weightlifters. People were finding out that I was back in town and they wanted to kind of do what I did at MDUSA. So I had a little team that started working with sports performance stuff. And then a year into that, I realized CrossFit really wasn't my thing. And weightlifting had grown so much that we didn't need I was always under the impression you needed a CrossFit to kind of create a feeder system for weightlifting, but weightlifting had grown to the point that that wasn't necessary anymore. So I sold the CrossFit, started the Strength Agenda as a standalone business, which had been mostly an online business up to that point. The first gym was a little shoebox of a gym, about 2,000 square feet total, like the entire building. The training space was like 1,100. Had sports performance, weightlifters training side by side, also had my remote team. And then last November, we moved into our new 5,500 square foot facility where we're just continuing things. And then 2 years ago, I became the strength and conditioning coach at Jones College Prep, which is a school in the Chicago public school systems. And they have a really cool setup where I'm the strength coach, but I'm not after school. What they did was they made strength and conditioning part of their PE curriculum. So the athletes and juniors and seniors can take my class instead of PE. So we have 90-minute classes where the kids come in, we go through our workouts and stuff like that. And then with remote learning and stuff like that, I'm actually teaching them how I teach my interns at the gym. And I'm teaching them how to write training programs and teaching them the history of strength and conditioning. Like we talked about the Olympics, we talked about, the Greeks and the Persians and the Chinese and how they train their militaries and stuff like that. And then it just kind of come back to here. And as we were talking about before we started recording, or I might have mentioned it here too, but now currently I'm on the pro circuit for Highland Games, and I've competed at I've been on 3 world teams for mass wrestling. Those are my 2 main sports, and I just like anything strength and conditioning related. I like lifting. It's one of my non-negotiables in life. I don't think I'm ever going to not be around a barbell. And then, you reached out, asked if I wanted to talk some conjugate and weightlifting, and I said, hell yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because the last guest I had on this podcast, his name is Jeremy Hartman. He's a power lifter and a coach, and he pretty much he does something very similar to you. He works with high school athletes, and he's kind of like the PE coach, but they run like strength and conditioning work, and he teaches them the barbell movements, and that almost helps prepare them for sport. And then he has a few people who kind of afterwards fall in love with powerlifting, and he's taken them up to a world level. And I think it's awesome that you guys have been able to do that and been able to impact the kids and people at a younger age, and then also just have a bigger reach. So I mean, how has that been, one, adapting your process to younger kids, but also then like seeing the influence you've had with these kids as they've played sports and then started to develop?
It's been fun, honestly. Fun is the best way to describe it. So, I've constantly just been one of those dudes where I'm always looking at something and seeing, like, whether it's mine or not, I always look at something that is currently in play and I'm like, how can I make that better? So, like, I took on my first intern in 2018. And I'll be honest, it didn't go the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
Good kid. But I was more disappointed in the school, and I'm not going to put the school on blast or anything like that, but I was disappointed in the school and how the kid was prepared before he came here, because I was essentially his last internship before he went out into the real world. And there were just basic things he did not understand. Like he literally, like one of the days he was just like, I want to do exactly what you're doing. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I will see you here tomorrow at 6 a.m. And he just looked at me and was like really caught off guard. And I'm like, well, you said you wanted to do everything, right? Like tomorrow's my cleaning day. I got to get in here at 6 a.m. clean. And then I get my training done. And then I go to my other job and then I come back. Like, I'm like, you said you wanted to do a day in the life. Like, this is it. And so then it just kind of got my wheels turning with internships and stuff like that. And I'm like, these guys don't actually know what goes on. And I also, at this point, I had multiple other people reach out to me for internships, but they wanted to be paid like a king's ransom to be interns. And I was just like, that's not how this works. Like when I was in college, like the school I went to, Aurora University, they did a great job with their interns. We had progressions of our internships. Like we had, your one that was like a couple days a week. Then we had one that was like a majority of your week. And then the one before you graduate was like a full on, like student teaching almost, because I was exercise science and physical education. I did both in college. And so I was just like, why aren't other schools doing this? So after that, I kind of retooled everything, and I'm like, I'm going to teach these kids like everything, because I don't know what that they have and stuff like that. And like, you could tell me, or you've seen this probably as much as I have. Like, I got tired of seeing all these people in the fitness industry, whether it's strength and conditioning, fitness on Instagram, whatever, that are just dumb. Like they're just parroting what they're seeing, but they have no thought process behind what they're doing. So I'm like, you know what? Like, be the change you kind of, that was the mindset I went through, like, be the change you want to see. So I was just like, all right, I'm going to start educating these kids on what I think are the important things. So like, I literally rewrote everything. To the point I started way back. Like I literally give these kids lectures and stuff like that to go over. And it has to do with like the history of the Olympics, like how the Olympics got started, how the sport of strongman got started, how the sport of powerlifting got started, how the sport of weightlifting got started, and its whole history, what strength and conditioning was used for. And then like from there, once I give them a history and a background, and Rogue has helped out tremendously now when they do their Legends documentaries, because I literally give the kids these documentaries to watch. And I'm like, you got to watch these. Like, you need to know your strength history if you're going to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Because I think that's a huge piece in strength and conditioning in particular, with a lot of these college coaches and these interns and stuff like that they don't understand is there. Like, they just think that this stuff just, you snapped your fingers and it was there. And I'm like, no, you got to learn, how things came to be in order to understand what you're doing. So I did, that's the first half of it. And then the second half of it, I teach them program design. And I will not say that I have everything figured out, but what I did was I took everything that I learned from Glenn, and it has been constantly evolving with my weightlifters. And as I've been doing this now since 2012, when working with athletes and coaching and stuff like that. And every year I add something to it, or I evolve, or I adjust something. And so now I've kind of expanded it into two streams of thought, where I have a linear periodized approach that I use, which is primarily what I do with my high school kids, because a lot of the kids that I get, they have zero strength and conditioning background whatsoever. Some of them have never seen a barbell before in their life. So we do more of a linear periodized approach, where we're kind of building up, we're like dropping reps, building intensity towards an anchor point, use that anchor point, reassess, start the process all over again. And that works really well for them. And then I've started to include more conjugate principles into that training and stuff like that, because that's what I do primarily at the gym. At the gym, I work with strongmen, powerlifters, Highland Games athletes, my weightlifters, obviously, and then even our sports performance program. We do my take on the conjugate method. And I know people are like, oh my God, you have them do box squats and bands and stuff like that. It's like, yes, we do, because it works. And so, but I've adjusted it for each different training group, and I've taken the basics of each of those adjustments. And that's what I'm teaching to my high school kids. So like, the transition has been fun. simply because the kids are these. So we've got kids now that are like starving for this information. You got more kids now that are on social media, that are on the internet. They have access to these things, and they just want to know why people are doing what they're doing. Like I had one kid in particular who is a baseball player. He's looking to go to school now to be. He wants to study exercise science, and because he didn't know that was a degree. His parents are bachelors of science. The dad's like a physicist. The mom, I can't remember what the mom did, but he didn't know that exercise science was a degree you can attain. And after talking to me, and I kind of pointed him in the right direction of some of the schools in the area that are, have really good programs, Aurora University being one of them. And so he's looking at, going to school to be a strength coach now. So it's been kind of cool to see that come to fruition. And then in a roundabout way, the school I used to teach at, I switched up the curriculum when I was there and created a fitness-based curriculum versus a sports-based curriculum. And some of those kids now, like I have one of those kids is interning with me now. And so it's kind of cool to kind of see all that come full circle, because that was pretty much how I got into this. I had a coach in high school. He was our offensive line coach, but he had a weightlifting class. And it got to the point where, like, by the time I was a senior, I took two weightlifting classes, because when you can take as many gen eds as you, or specials as you want, I'm going to take PE. So I took two weightlifting classes, and then I was an aide for him. And so it was just cool because I got to like learn a lot from him, and he kind of sparked that interest in the barbell and wanting to teach that to kids, because it was so instrumental in my development. Because I'm not the most talented person in the world, but I feel like my base in weight training has helped me and given me an advantage in every sport that I've done. So it's just kind of cool to kind of repeat that cycle, but do it in my own way. So fun is the way I would describe that transition in terms of what I do with the gym to working with these high school kids.
Yeah, I guess it's something you almost have to keep in mind. But I mean, it's tough to, but it's something you almost have to keep in mind every time you interact with a kid or a person you're working with, is they could potentially go down the same path that I went down, or a similar path. I mean, because as you alluded to, at some point, Tom Sroka was a young, 15, 16, 17-year-old who just got interested in lifting a barbell, and now here you are with a weightlifting team, and well-known coach, and coaching kids up, and so someone has to go down that path at some point, and you just never know who it is. So developing kind of the best plan, I guess, to help them reach whatever point they'll end up getting to is the best way to go about it, right?
Yeah, like I said, fun is just the best way to describe it, and I can't describe it any other way. Like, a lot of people are struggling with their remote learning and stuff like that right now. I am like enjoying the hell out of it, because me and my kids, like after class is over, I have a couple of kids that'll stick around for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and they just ask questions about technique or this or that. Like, it's just cool to have those conversations and see those wheels start to turn in their head.
Yeah, and I guess this is actually a good place to segue into today's topic, because you mentioned a lot about, learning from Glenn, who was obviously a great, an incredible weightlifting coach, and then 100%. Using that and using the other information you've picked up along the way to teach the kids kind of similar streams of programming. So this show specifically will look at the conjugate. I always hate adding like a modifier at the end, like the conjugate system or method. But basically we're looking at the way that Westside approaches powerlifting, in that they're looking at targeting different, they're looking at targeting speed on one day, and then they're looking at targeting kind of maximal strength on one day. They rotate exercises to avoid, accommodation to the exercise, the bar, or whatever they're doing. And they train a very specific way, and we're just looking at how that, almost like that template, that idea applies to weightlifting. And I've been informed that, Tom, you figured it out. So how has this idea developed for you? And then let's talk about where you've ended up with it.
Yeah, so wouldn't say I've got it figured out. I'm working on it, but I feel like I have a good handle on it based on what I have learned. So when I first started training with Glenn, everybody was saying Bulgarian, and I was like, oh, okay, like I have no idea what that means, but all right, cool, like let's just go with it. And then for the first 6 months I was at Cal Strength, I lived with Glenn. He let me stay at his house. I slept on his couch for 6 months, and at night him and I would just have some good chats, usually over food. because, you got to eat. And we would just kind of be sitting up all night, just kind of talking about training and stuff like that. And I flat out asked him one time, I'm like, what is like your training philosophy? And he just kind of looked at me. He's just like conjugate-ish. And so I kind of asked, what that meant. And he just talked about how, like, he was the first one that told me about the Dynamo Club and what they actually did and stuff like that, and how they used a ton of variation of exercises and a lot of accessory work and this and that. And it just kind of got my wheels turning. So I started doing my own research, and then I'm drawing a blank on the author, but there's a book that was translated over. Bud Charniga translated the Russian methods over, and I read that book and stuff like that. And then I started listening to Louis and talking to Glenn more and more. And so pretty much like what Glenn had said is, they push heavy in the lifts, but it's not always snatch, clean, and jerk off the floor. It's complexes, it's hangs, it's blocks, it's this and it's that, but they go in like 3 to 4 week waves. And that's what we did when I was at Cal Strength. And now I also realized I was a small snippet of all the training Glenn has done, so I can only speak about what I did when I was there. And that was how we operated. We operated on 3-4 week blocks. Sometimes we would go 6, which is a little bit much, and you can kind of see how that didn't work for a lot of people, myself included. But we would push those main exercises, and then we would rotate and go into use a different exercise or a different stimulus. Squats were the same way. Like sometimes we would do just front squats. Sometimes we would do back squats. Sometimes it'd be doubles. Sometimes it'd be triples. Sometimes it'd be pauses. Sometimes it'd be Texas method. Like he was always constantly rotating the movements. And it just kind of got my mind thinking, like, this can work for weightlifting. Obviously, we were in a different situation at MDUSA and Cal Strength because that was essentially our job. But I was like, I can apply this to, everyday people and get good results out of it. So I'm a little bit OCD when it comes to this stuff. So I was trying to keep things in a routine, strict setup. And so what I started to develop was essentially, because you can't do traditional dynamic effort, max effort, repetition effort. It's just not possible. You cannot do bands and chains on the lifts. You can use it as like a primer movement or something like that, but like using it as a main movement is just silly. I use a lot of bands. I use a lot of chains, or not chains, but I use a lot of band work and stuff like that with accessories and some warm-up movements and things like that, but you can't do it on the main lifts. So what I started doing was I started just creating 4-week blocks, and every day of the week we're doing a version of the snatch and clean and jerk. And then what I did from there was I have this thing that I use with my athletes called the 80-90 chart, where we take 80% and 90% of your best competition snatch, clean and jerk, because that's all that matters. If you're a weightlifter, your goal is to improve your total. And so what we do is you put it in a notebook and you draw a line connecting it. So then as we're going through training blocks and every variation that we do, whether it's, and I consider everything a variation. So for snatch, for instance, you have, 10 plus variations. You got snatch balance, overhead squat, power snatch, hang snatch, triples, doubles, complexes, pauses at the knee, blocks, whatever. You have so many variations. Anytime that you're hitting something that is within 80 to 90% of your competition best, you put a little tick mark on that line. And it just, because Glenn told me that, from all his studies when he was at Wichita Falls and stuff like that, body receives the most physiological adaptation between 80 and 90%. So our goal is to build as much capacity between that 80 and 90%. And then when you start building capacity in the 90 plus range, that's usually when you're ready for a PR. So it kind of uses that accumulation tracking to kind of tell you when you're ready to do a PR, and so you kind of let that dictate where you can go. And it also helps with auto regulation because it allows people to, if you're not feeling good, just get a rep in, get a rep in at 80% and move on, because something's always going to be better than nothing, and that money in the bank is what's going to be helpful. So every 4 weeks I rotate exercises. I have 3 main days, which are more of my max effort days. So usually day 1 is like jerk and snatch work, mostly overhead stuff. My day 3 is usually clean work. And then day 5 is usually total work. And then days 2 and 4 are primarily, I would consider those my dynamic effort. So we're doing power variations, tall snatches, no hook, no feet, stuff like that. But it's more controlled. So we're working on being faster, working on that turnover, that speed under the bar, stuff like that. So those are essentially my dynamic effort days. And then we focus on strength work. Far out from competitions, I have my athletes sumo deadlift and I have them do box squats, simply because Jack Canberra, who runs a gym out in Hawaii, Honolulu, Hawaii, or no, he's in Oahu, sorry. I worked with him for a little bit, and he opened my eyes to the benefit of box squats and sumo deadlifts in regards to the fact that when it comes to the box squat and the deadlift, that they are the only two movements that he's been able to find, and I since have not been able to find anything else, but they're the only two movements that you can keep a completely vertical shin and load the posterior chain with loads that meet or exceed the snatch and clean and jerk numbers, and place that emphasis directly on the posterior chain. And so I haven't been able to find any other movements that do that. And also like training a wider stance, what I've noticed, especially with me and my deadlifts, I can do sumo deadlifts, I can do snatch grip deadlifts all day long, and then I'll go back to conventional and my conventional will go up. But training my conventional and then going to one of the other variations, it doesn't always work that way. So I like far out in an off season, my athletes will do box squats. Sometimes they'll be banded, sometimes they won't. We will do sumo pulls instead of regular pulls and stuff like that. And it helps build the hips and the posterior chain up in a way that just traditional lifting cannot. Like that violent extension at the top that is needed for weightlifting, you can actually train and overload that with those two movements. So I incorporate those and rotate those in. We usually do about 4 to 8 weeks of sumo deadlifts and box squats, not always at the same time, but mixing it up here and there. We'll usually do that about 2 times a year. Very towards the beginning of the year, like we're going to be doing a box squat volume accumulation block coming up at the start of January, and then we won't do another one probably till sometime in like August. But those are just little things that from the conjugate method that I've taken and applied in. And those usually will be on those either the speed days or it'll be like on the clean day, because the clean day is a little bit more just focusing on the clean, whereas like my overhead day, it'll either be snatches and jerks or just one or the other. And so I don't want I don't want to destroy the posterior chain on days 1 or 5, because those are usually my heaviest days of the week. Day 3 is usually a little bit of a medium intensity day, and then days 2 and 4 a little bit on the lighter side. So, and that's usually days 2 and 4 are usually where I will incorporate pulls as well. So that's usually if I'm going to throw in box squats or sumo pulls, it'll be on that day 2 and 4. But yeah, that's essentially how I do it. Like I said, it's 4-week blocks. The only thing I do different than the conjugate method is I do include a deload week. And the reason I do that is just simply because what people don't understand about the bands and chains is it can be done for raw weightlifting. I call bands and chains ego destroyers. Bands in particular, you can go heavy all the time using band tension, and you're not going to hit a true max. I always get asked, like, how much band tension is that at the top? I don't care when I'm lifting. Simply because if my banded deadlift goes up, chances are my deadlift has gone up. And the bands keep you in your groove. They're helpful with technique, because the minute you get out of your groove or out of that alignment in your technique, it's going to make the lift infinitely harder. And like I said, you can push to a heavy intensity with those, or to a heavy max or whatever you're doing for the day, but you're not going to go as high intensity as you would if you were doing an all out max out with straight weight. So I like bands and stuff like that, and that's why Louis doesn't do that, or that I've seen. And everything I've read with the conjugate method, there's really not a lot in there about deload weeks. The only time that they start to deload is as they're getting ready for a competition. So the big difference is I do a deload. So I do 4-week blocks where weeks 1, 2, and 3 we're building up in intensity, and then week 4 is a complete deload. But we're doing the same movements each week. The only thing that's changing is the reps or the intensity and so on and so forth. So week 3 is usually our heaviest week. Week 4 is a complete deload. Then the next 4-week block, we switch the movements up and we pick a different variation of those exercises and start the process all over again.
Yeah, and I obviously have a lot of questions stemming from that. And then I have a few comments too. I think the thing that, Louis is famous for saying, or at least trying to convey, is that when they train a variety of grips, a variety of stances, a variety of like foot widths when they squat, box heights. Like, so when you talk about sumo deadlifting, I think it's important to contextualize it, and especially with the box squats. And it's funny because I actually have two people who, so they were like, one girl kind of was getting like some discomfort in her leg when she'd get into the bottom of a squat. So we put her on a box. So I indirectly am like trying that out. And then the same with another girl. I'm just trying out box squats just as like a way to keep them squatting. But I also just curious when you actually sit on a box, kind of get that little pull back and then stand up, like how it's going to transfer to the pole, and just their squat in general. So I kind of been playing around with that. And then for a couple people who tend to be slow out of the bottom or like slow through the middle, actually slow through the middle, and they kind of get stuck at the top. We've been using bands to just force that constant acceleration through the entire lift. And I've, 3 weeks in, and I've already noticed a difference with the ability to just stick out a weight instead of just immediately getting pushed down. So I think those are interesting and useful concepts. With the sumo deadlift, I mean, the big thing people have to remember is it's all about the majority of your training, right? So like, what do you do on the whole that dictates how you lift, like your technique, your strengths, your weaknesses. Now, if you just did sumo deadlift and you only snatched and cleaned like once a week, like that wouldn't make sense, right? If that was year round, that wouldn't make sense. The same with like a low bar squat. Like people talk about low bar squatting, and you can say whatever you want. I've never done it for weightlifters, but it's not like just low bar squatting, right? Usually the people do that. It's an accessory movement. It comprises one training block or maybe two, but it's not like out of the full training year, it's like 50 lifts, and then they do like, I don't know, 15,000. So very small influence. But I guess getting back to the way you implement this within a training week, because, people, I guess, don't want to hear me ramble too much.
No.
When it comes to the max effort days, and you talk about kind of checking the box, or like marking the line between 80 and 90%, is that something where every set or every exercise is open-ended? And then what does like the training volume for that day look like?
So one thing I did forget to add real quick before I answer that question is the other thing I do that I see, and I'm not saying nobody else does this and I didn't reinvent it, but I do a ton of accessory work with my athletes, between reading a lot of the stuff that Louis has put out there. Because that was the one thing we never did with Glenn. We literally had one day of accessory work. And it was Saturdays. We would train 6 days a week, and we'd come in on Saturdays and we would have our squats, we'd have our push presses, and then accessories. That was literally the only day we would do accessory work. And he never gave us stuff to do. We just got to pick. But one thing that I learned from both Jack and Louis and just reading and talking to them and stuff like that is, so my athletes over a course of a week try to get about I would like 300, but I settle for 2. We get about 200 reps of tricep work in, 200 reps of upper back work in, whether it's band pull aparts, face pulls, stuff like that, 200 reps of hamstring work, and then 200 reps of core work in. And that's obviously spread out through the week in a ton of different variations: single leg, single arm, banded, dumbbell. I have a couple of machines. Like I have a belt squat in my gym. I have a cable machine I have to actually assemble. I got a lot of strongman equipment, stuff like that. So I try to give them as much variety in their accessory work as possible. We do pulls, carries, sled work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the other piece of the conjugate method that I was able to take over that I like. So like I would say, roughly anywhere from like 40 to 50% of our work, volume wise, is our accessory work. And that I think has made a huge difference as well, because it helps, the phrase I've heard that I absolutely love is a pyramid is only tall as its base is wide. And so with all these variations, and you were just talking about it, just adding all these different little movements, and yes, they're not the main staples of what we do, but by adding all these different stimuli, whatever, to the body, creating all these stimuli and adding all these different variations, it just gives us as big of a base as possible. So when we're getting ready for a competition, there should be very minimal breakdown. And then to go back to your question, I just lost my train of thought. What was your question again?
No, you're good. You're good. And actually, I did have a thought before, and I guess I can bring it up now. It's, when you transition to all of these sports, you were already, and I'm going to be gracious when I say this, and you'll probably be like, no. You were already pretty good, right? So when you transition to like Moss wrestling or all these like the strongman events or highland events, like you were already decent. And it's not because you train them. It's because all of the strength and muscle that you've developed over time just carried over. So it's kind of that same idea that you're talking about with the pyramid. I mean, you develop kind of like these general kind of changes, like getting stronger, getting bigger, and then it tends to just benefit you more. I mean, there's that Louis Simmons quote where he'll ask someone, what did you deadlift the first time you ever touched a barbell? And people will say 315 or 405. And it's, well, how did you do that? And it's whatever you did before you deadlifted carried over in a very general way to deadlifting. And
100%. Having
the accessory work, the smaller movements, building those muscles up, building the different stances, just getting stronger as a person tends to carry over to the more specific exercises. And I think people like that more. People like feeling jacked, looking jacked, getting a pump. So I think for athlete buy-in, that's huge. But the question I had was,
you would think. Sometimes I feel like I have to babysit and be like, hey, go do your accessory work. Oh, I will. I don't want to be too sore for snatches tomorrow. It's like, oh, okay, cool. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, it's on those max effort days, what does that look like in terms of, one, like the volume of work that you're doing with those exercises? And then is it just like a check the box thing, or is it percentages and we're going to bump up over time, or is it kind of like, hey, hit what you can, try and beat it next week, add a couple kilos in there?
So I used to do that, the latter thing you said, where I was like, hey, we're just going to go heavy. The goal is to try to beat it each week. The problem I started to run into is athletes not listening, plain and simple. And so actually one of my other athletes came up with a great idea, and I implemented it for a while, and I like it. So what I do now is I do bracketed percentages. So for instance, week 1 on an exercise, it's like, hey, you have to hit 5 sets between 75 and 85%. If you hit all 5 sets between that percentage with no misses in that, once you get into that range, you get 2 additional bonus sets. You get to pick the weight, and you can go up for 2 more sets. And then what I'll do is I'll go like 75 to 85% week 1, 80 to 90% week 2, and then 85 to 95% week 3. And it could be like 5 sets on week 1, 4 sets on week 2, 3 sets on week 1, but you still get those 2 additional bonus sets. So essentially speaking, but if you get to that week 3 and you have, no misses, you've hit 5 sets between 85 and possibly 95, 100% based on whatever the exercises and stuff like that. I'm adjusting things a little bit differently now because my team has grown so much. New lifters cannot handle that, plain and simple. When you know this as well as I do. When you're in a gym and you've got guys next to you that are doing, clean complexes with 170, 180, and you're over here trying to do, 100 or 110, you're going to try to push yourself so you can keep up with those guys or impress those guys or whatever your thought process is. And so it's just one of those deals where, so I've adjusted things a little bit more. For like, I kind of have 3 levels of programming now where like my top tier guys, it's a little more open-ended for them. They can push heavy because I know that they're going to make the smart jumps and stuff like that they need to make. And that was the other problem I was having is with those, like I would literally have guys who would get through their bracket. Like, let's say we're doing the 75 to 85%. I would have newer guys or just guys that are just, I wouldn't say not smart, but they're just overzealous. And they would literally do their sets between 75 and 85 percent, and then their next jump would be like 92.5%. And then like it's kind of turned into a joke where we were calling it dumb jump whatever day of the week it was, like dumb jump Monday, but like it got to the point where I'm like, okay, people are going to start getting hurt. And then like my remote athletes were doing it. It's like in the gym is one thing because I can monitor and be like, okay, you're done. But like when remote athletes are doing it, it's like, okay, this is the problem. So we had to kind of reel it in and stuff like that. And I had to kind of explain like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And then that's where the 80-90 chart came into play because I'm like, look, I don't care. The 80-90 chart wasn't there from the start. Actually, another one of my lifters, because we were talking, I do goal setting meetings at the beginning of every year. And one of my lifters was like, yeah, not going to lie, the dumb jump thing messes with me. So I created this little graph that I write out in my notebook. And this is how it helps me, stay on track and not get caught up trying to compete with all the guys on the team and stuff like that. And I was like, that's genius. And he works on airplanes for a living, so it makes sense that he's that smart. And so I took it and I was like, I just started sharing it with everybody because I was like, I like this. Like, let's do this, guys. And it helps. It helps people just kind of reel things in a little bit and give them perspective. Because like if you do Like, let's say you do, your 5 sets between 75 and 85%, but you miss your first 2 or 3 lifts at like 75%. Then you hit like one at 80%, one at 85%. You've only gotten 2 of the 5 lifts made, but you could have made smarter jumps, like gone like 75%, 77.5, 80, 82, 85, and 82.5, 85%. So instead of only getting 1 or 2 lifts in that range, you now got 3, plus you can then add 2 more reps because you made all of your lifts and you made smarter jumps. Mm-hmm. So it's just one of those deals where it just kind of helped a little bit with auto regulation for my remote athletes. And it kind of just gave them a visual onto what we're trying to accomplish. And they can use it for each and every day, no matter whether we're working more on like our powers and our speed stuff, or we're working on our max effort stuff with like the days 1, 3, and 5. But so right now, like I said, the best method that I've seen is that bracketed work with the bonus sets, if you make all your work. And now obviously like I can't babysit the remote lifters. I can't see what they're doing. So it's hard to tell whether they actually follow it or not. But for the most part, like we have seen athletes have with this system, and now this particular system has been in play for about 3 years now. And we have seen athletes literally put anywhere from like 15 to 25 kilos on their total in a year. Sometimes that 15 kilos is on just one lift. So like it works when it's done right. And if you're smart about picking your attempts and stuff like that. And even the athletes who don't choose wisely in terms of their attempts, they're still seeing progress year to year to year. Usually the ones that I see that have the least amount of progress are the ones that don't pick their attempts wisely. They go all out the first week of a training block, and then they got nothing left in the tank for the next 2 training blocks. Or they just simply don't do their accessory work. And like, they think I don't notice, but I can tell when we're trying to get work done, and especially as the intensity goes up and like they can't hold, weight overhead, or like they can't support it in the way that I would like it. And they've got to contort their body into all sorts of goofy positions to get the lift done. Like that's a huge sign to me that they're not doing their accessory work. And it's like, I can only say so many things to them about doing it, but like eventually it's got to be on them to get that work done and to put that work in.
Yeah. I think, and it's funny as a coach, you realize how much you have to say and how many kind of nuanced points you have to give about a simple program. And it's to your example. So I gave a girl some on the minute work, and I said, hey, start at 70%, just build up, because it was like a last block we were doing, and it's kind of hitting heavy singles with like a cap on it. And she's like, okay, well, how should I pick my jumps? And I guess I never really thought like, well, the way I do it is I spend like half of the on the minute work at the first percentage that's prescribed. And then as it feels good, I'll say, okay, I've hit like 5 singles out of 10 at 80%. They were money. They were great. Found a groove. And then I'll build up slowly, and I'll try and plan my jumps to hit the number I want for the day. But some people, they're like, from rep 1, it's 5 kilo jumps up, they hit a wall, and then what do you do, right? Where do you go from there? You really, there's no way to. You have to back down. It's a mess. But those are things.
But that's it's funny you mention that. Like if I have athletes that do the same thing. If I write EMOM work and stuff like that, and I flat out, because we're not now, but we will be starting a training block where they will have EMOM work, and it's just I write out all their percentages for them. Because I have athletes that'll do that, and if I do leave it open ended, I will say, if you go down, drop 10%, build back up, and then they'll be like, do I like? I literally will have athletes that'll look at me and be like, do I have to go down? Yeah, like you chose poorly, like. Go back down. Like, so that's that's one way that I'll put it in there. But like, if I do have weight building up, like I will say, like, for instance, if I'm doing a 10-minute EMOM, I'll do like 2 at this percentage, 2 at this percentage, 2 at this percentage. And I'll go that way. So they're kind of easing up into it. Or I'll say, like, I'll do the brackets again, where I'll say, okay, you've got, 3 reps between this range, 3 reps between this range, 3 reps between this range. The last rep, you pick the percentage.
Okay. And then kind of thinking more about how, thinking about the way Glenn programmed is he would do, say, far out from a competition, it would go like blocks, pauses, hangs, and then from the floor, something like that. And I know with Louis, it's, switching the bar, it's rotating the bar, and that kind of changes the training max. It allows for you to do. Oh, I was just going to going to say, like, it allows you to do the same thing in the sense that, like, maybe it's the same band tension, it's the same weights when you wake up, but it's a different bar, so it's a different training effect. When you write out, say, block to block to block before a competition, do you have some sort of like preset idea of it's blocks, it's pauses, it's hangs, it's from the floor, or is it, we just see where the weakness is, or it's a different training cycle, so we just want to try something new? It's like, do you have something in mind beforehand?
So I have the whole year loosely mapped out, and it depends on where you're at. So like I said, I always operate on 2 anchor points for my athletes. For my top tier athletes, I don't have anybody that's international, and I'm 100% okay with that. Strictly based on how the system is set up now, I don't have the money to travel for all those things. Right. So like senior nationals, AO finals, those are the 2 big anchor points. Then I have my masters group, which I have I have a rather large and successful masters group.
I did notice that.
Masters nationals, masters worlds, those are their 2 big events. And then everybody else in my group, I have what I call like my local group. And so we have our state meet, which is usually around April. And then we have a meet called Mid-Americans, which is usually around October. Those are their 2 anchor points. And everything is just building up to that. So really far out from that meet is we're doing a lot of, like Glenn says, yes, I'll start with more partials, more overload. And then as we're building, it gets closer and closer to the floor, whether it's pauses, hangs, whatever it is. But like when it but the other thing that it's really funny because I had a newer athlete. I wouldn't say he got mad, but he was like, "Oh, you seem to have your head in your phone all the time." And so what I'm doing is I use the notes section on my phone, and I'm keeping track of where people are missing and how they're missing. Like I have, and I do this in the gym because I can't do it. Obviously, like I do video review with my athletes, but like it's not the same where I am physically able to observe them. So I will literally go find a place far off in the gym and I will just kind of perch myself over there and I will just open up my phone. Now I can do it on my computer because I've upgraded. But I will just pull up my notes section. I got everybody's names and I will say, okay, miss at this because of, miss at this because of, miss at this because of, and I will just write it out and it just kind of gives me data points in terms of what we need to work on for the next training block. And what I'll do is then because I have a loose guide for the entire year, but I write things out 4 weeks at a time. Simply because things will change. And like, obviously like last year with the pandemic and stuff like that, my masters people, they had to peak they essentially did 3 preps because we were getting ready for the original masters nationals date. Then they pushed it back. So then we're like, all right, we're going to continue this on. Sorry, like we got to retool, blah, 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 blah. Then they just canceled it all together. And then they're like, okay, we're doing it in September, at the end of September. I'm like, all right, cool. So like I had those 3 different, waves of prep that these guys had to do. And so like, I just kind of I'll sit down and look at my notes and see what I got. And then as I'm writing the training block, I'm like, okay, well, like it seemed like a majority of people were missing because of this. So I'll make that adjustment in the training block based on the variation that I think can target that the most. And that's kind of how I program based on, the feedback I'm getting. And that's where the in-person coaching helps versus the remote. Like remote coaching, you can make all the suggestions and stuff like that, but you're not able to observe how they're moving from an empty barbell all the way up to their working set.
Yeah, I mean, remote coaching is tough. You like literally, shout out to Renee. She had a problem bending her back knee in the jerk, so we stole an idea from Spencer Arnold, and I just had her place a jerk block topper literally behind her foot, and I was like, you're gonna die if you step on this, so don't do that.
Right.
But in person, right, you can physically just go up to them and say, get in this position. Like, that's right. Do that again over and over and over. And with programming, it's even more complicated, as you said. Like, you don't see any of the warm-ups. You don't see, sometimes you don't hear about the misses. Sometimes you don't hear about the makes. I mean, it's complicated. Right. And then with the speed days, right? I would say those sound to me like more technical days where you're working on one, pulling the bar higher, but also if you do like no hook, no feet, you're grooving the pull. It's lighter loads. It's easier to recover from. Are those following a similar sequence to the max effort exercises where if you go off blocks on those dynamic days, you're going to also go off blocks, or is it just kind of, again, what you see is what you need?
I try to spread out the stimulus throughout the entire week. I won't do, me personally, I get bored if I'm doing block work of every lift.
Yeah.
4 weeks straight.
Yeah.
So what I might do is like, let's say we're doing like block work on our main lift. So if we're doing like jerks from the rack, jerks in particular, I have like three main variations that I do. I had 4. I don't like pausing in the catch. I've just seen too much injury. I've seen too many injuries or tweaks happen from it.
Yeah.
So I just don't do it. Same reason I don't do overhead squats. I think max overhead squat is one of the dumbest things in weightlifting, and it drives me nuts when I see people doing it, because if you have to set up the lift by doing a behind the neck wide grip jerk, like you probably shouldn't be putting that over your head.
Right.
So anyways, what I think snatch balance is a better overhead training tool than overhead squat personally, but that's just me. I'm also a worry wart, so I operate risk versus reward in terms of injury. So I've had too many people tweak shoulders, elbows with pauses in the catch. And yes, I understand that means that they probably were going a little bit too heavy, but like you don't know what is too heavy when you're testing out movements like that. Right. So it's 6 1/2 dozen of the other as far as I'm concerned. But like my 3 main variations are out of the rack, off the blocks, or with a pause in the dip. Those are my 3 variations. I also will throw in push press plus jerk or front squat plus jerk. But it just depends. And so like, let's say we're doing block work. So if we're doing jerks out of the rack, then we'll do snatches off the high blocks. Like I won't do jerks from the blocks, snatches from the blocks. Just give me that stimulus. And then the clean work will be also the same, like high blocks. And then if we're doing like a total day, that might be work off the high blocks as well. But then like those other days, I might do pause off the knee or hangs, or something along those, or I might switch it up and do low blocks or something like that. But it won't be the exact same thing that we did on those heavier days, but it'll be similar in terms of stimulus. Like if I'm trying to build strength in a specific start position or a part of the start position, I'll use a different variation that I have to create that stimulus that I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I know, and you can even speak to this personally since you were there, but watching the MDUSA videos and kind of talking to Glenn, it looked like when you were, in the paused phase of training where you're doing a lot of pauses, it was like the entire week there was a lot of pauses and
it sucked.
Top sets and down sets and, everything seemed to be paused. So did you as an athlete enjoy that, or was that just too much for you?
No, I never enjoyed training there. No, it was one of those. I'll be honest, I was probably a huge pain in the ass for both Glenn and Don, because I wanted to know why we were doing what we were doing. It wasn't I was questioning. I just wanted to understand the method behind the madness, so I could I could just tell myself if I was having a rough day, but like, there's a reason we're doing this. And I know it annoyed Glenn more than it annoyed Don, because Glenn's something like, Glenn, man, a few words. He would just be like, well, Tom, just do the damn lift. Like, all right, cool. Like, sorry, man. And I'd go do it. But like, I think what Glenn did a really good job was the types of pauses. So we would do pauses for an entire training block, but like it would be like week 1 was a 5-second pause. The next week was like a 3-second pause. Then it was a 1-second pause. So like while we were doing pauses, there was that general stimulus adjustment each like week or every couple weeks or something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it seemed like he would, vary the height of the pause or vary the reps.
Yeah,
and it's kind of that idea that you hear him preach or heard him preach about a lot, which was like you need to set records, and you need to set records in whatever you can. Yeah. The more records you can set, the better you're going to be.
Yep.
And you could see that in the variety of the exercises where it's like he had, and this is kind of where I see Louie and Glenn seeing eye to eye, is like you have exercises that are useful and make sense a lot of the time. So you kind of cycle through those. So maybe it's like a snatch plus a hang snatch.
Yep.
You see that maybe more often than like a pause triple from 3 positions, right? That maybe comes around once, but
yeah.
Do you do something similar where you have exercise, and you talked about it with the jerk, maybe you can go into it with the snatch and the clean, but exercises that you see a big return on, big bang for your buck, do you tend to go there more often?
So for me, for instance, like when I was an athlete, Glenn, that was one thing I will give Glenn the utmost credit for. He knew what your bread and butter was. He knew what you needed to do in order to be in shape to lift big weights. My best meets that I ever had when I was with Glenn, I was snatching big off the low blocks. My front squat triple was off the charts. And then my push presses
Mm-hmm.
I was pushing big weight. So like the best meet I ever had under Glenn was the 2013. Well, best national meet I had was the 2013 American Open final.
Mm-hmm.
Going into that meet, I had snatched 151 off the low blocks. My best up until that point was only like 146. So I had hit 151 off the low blocks. I had done 180 for a triple on push press. And then my front squat triple, I did 225. And I ended up going into that meet and I snatched, I believe, 147, clean and jerked 198. And I ended up winning that meet. That was also the meet, coincidentally, that he had a stroke. But that was my best. Those are my best lifts. Those are 3 lifts. And then we did a meet almost a year later, the fall showdown at MDUSA. And I did, there's a video of it where I got into a snatch battle with Trevor. And I snatched 152 off the low blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Push press was a little bit down. I think I did 170 for a set of 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then my front squat triple, I did 225. And that was right before I hit my PR I had a PR front squat at the time of 232. So, and then I ended up doing that meet and I went 150, 200. So like those were my like 3 lifts. Like if those lifts were going really well for me, I was going to hit something big in a competition. I will say first, I don't know what it depends on the athlete, but low block snatches and cleans seem to be the bread and butter for athletes. And I don't know if that's like my will imposed on them a little bit because I love low block lifts. Like I always can do better lifts, better technically sound lifts off the low blocks. So like I will milk that until it's dry in terms of building that technical efficiency and overloading those lifts. Like I always try to find things that can overload my athletes and stuff like that. So front squat to jerk is another one that I love. Like I'll do a block of like 3 plus 2, 2 plus 1, 1 plus 1 during a prep. And my athletes' jerks are usually spot on when we do that. Jerk recoveries is another movement that some athletes of mine have had really big success with. Like, as we're starting our taper, we won't necessarily push heavy jerks, but we'll push heavy jerk recoveries. And we'll do a week of triples, doubles, singles. And like I have power racks now that I can do them out of, and I have jerk blocks and stuff like that. But it's just one of those deals where it helps, you know, it helps those athletes. And so like, but for me personally, low block lifts and the front squat, the jerk complex seem to be my 2 big ones that have really helped athletes kind of get over mental barriers and stuff along those lines. Another one that I've noticed is lifts from the power position. I have a guy in particular who he's an 80. He's well, it depends on what time of the year it is, whether it's like the holidays or not, but he's usually an 81, 89, somewhere in between there. And he has done, his best clean and jerk is 165, but he has done 190 from the power position.
Damn, dude.
Like, and we have figured up, or not figured up. I can't even talk right now. We figured out that going into a meet that helps him build that confidence, and he literally just stand up with it, sit in the power position, and go like a dip and drive on a jerk. And like I said, I think he's built up to like his best with that is 190, but it's 30 kilos over his clean. So he knows that he can stand up with it if he racks it, you know. His jerk is the lagging of the 2, but it just kind of helps going into a competition for me. Anything that is going to help build that confidence that like they can handle that lift, I'm down for. And so, like I said, for him, that's one of his main movements. I have one masters lifter that if she's jerk recovering 110 to 120% of her best jerk, mentally she is good to go on clean and jerks. Like I it doesn't make sense to me because I used to hate jerk recoveries, but she absolutely loves them and she does really well with them. I have other athletes that like if another athlete in particular, if they can double a lift, that it's one of those deals where it's probably not the best. Like it's probably something I'm doing wrong, to be honest. But like I have had athletes who like they can double a lift and they're good for it at a meet, and that's kind of their marker. So it's just kind of finding those things. But for me, the general consensus is low block lifts, whether it's doubles, triples, singles, front squat to jerk complexes, are the two bread and butters in terms of like building that confidence in their athletes. And then, like I said, and then on a 1B tier would be jerk recoveries and lifts from the power position.
Mm-hmm. No, my last question, kind of as we wrap up here, would be just out of curiosity with the jerk recoveries. I've seen people, because admittedly it is like tough to get into the split position and perform it correctly with a lot of weight. Have you ever had people do like power jerk recoveries? And
yeah.
Like a similar effect, or is it you have to kind of be in the split to get it to do what you want?
No. I have no issues with power jerk recoveries. Here's my deal when it comes to power jerk versus split jerking. Similar to sumo to conventional. Power jerk can help build your split jerk. Split jerk isn't going to help build your power jerk. So like I have athletes that we will do strict power jerk work. They hate it. They don't get a choice. But then when they go back to their split jerk, it's infinitely better.
Right. Yeah, I actually I just had a girl who we've been pushing the push press and the power jerk up, and she split jerked maybe like 10 total reps in a week, 5 total reps, and did, triple that in power jerks and like quadruple that in push press. And she just clean and jerked a PR and,
awesome.
like
that's
easy PRs. Right. And that's the thing is sometimes when we talk about trusting the process, it's not only with exercise selection or like bar speed, right? When you do, like banded work or work that's like lighter with more band tension, you're like, how's this having a training effect? Like it seems so weird, and I'm not grinding through lifts or something, but you just kind of trust it, and eventually it pays off. So
good deal. Yeah, no, it's like I said, just finding those variations. And that's the thing that I think people misunderstood about Louis is like he didn't say, like, a lot of people give him a hard time about getting on weightlifters and stuff like that. And if anybody's ever read his Westside for weightlifting book, there is nothing in there about technique. Mm-hmm. He is just offering his insights on how to get athletes stronger, and he's just providing as many examples as possible. And that's the thing as coaches that we're still trying to do, regardless of what the sport is. You're trying to find that mix of exercise selection and rep scheme and stuff like that that's going to make your athlete better, because at the end of the day, it's what we're supposed to be doing. So it's just one of those deals, just tinkering around, figuring out what works and stuff like that. And it's no different than any other training method. It's just the bread and butter of the conjugate method is using as wide a variety of exercises as possible. And then as you're getting close to competition, you start pulling away those varieties like any other training method and going from there.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting you say that, because if you were to ask Louis probably about technique, he would just defer back to those Russian manuals where it's like, hey, they told you how to lift, they gave you the technique. Right. And granted, it's not perfect, but the idea still holds. It's like if he gets a sprinter, he's not going to teach them to run, but if you get them strong enough and powerful enough, like they'll be probably a better sprinter.
Exactly.
Now, Tom, people who are listening to this podcast and think to themselves, kind of like Steven, shout out to Barbell Yoda on Instagram, I want to be a part of the Strength Agenda weightlifting team because this sounds really intriguing. I want to check this out, see how you implement Westside or the conjugate system for weightlifting. Where can they follow you? Where can they follow the team to inquire more about it?
Yeah. So if you go to my personal page is Strength Coach Sroka. I got a couple of highlight things from my stories and different programs and things like that we do. The gym page at The Strength Agenda, or you can go to www.thestrengthagenda.com, and I think it's like the Learn More tab, and then it'll say contact us or join the team. Mm-hmm. You click on that, fill an inquiry page, and that goes directly to me, and we chat. I actually just filled out a bunch of those this morning because we had a couple of people reach out. But yeah, just reach out to me on social media. I've got people that'll randomly email me too. Like my email's tom@thestrengthagenda.com. Even if it's not to join the team, you just want to, like, people are coaches and they want to learn more and stuff like that. I'm actually working on a couple of free resources. I tried doing it during the pandemic, but it just didn't take off because everybody had other things to worry about. But I'm trying to create a free coaching resource where just kind of coaches just get together, talk about ideas and stuff like that, both on the business and the training side of things, because Glenn wouldn't let I talked about it in one of the other things that I've posted recently. Like, Glenn ripped up a rent check in my face for 3 straight months when I tried paying him. And all he told me was like, just pay it forward. I don't need your damn money. And I'm like, okay. So I'm just trying to do some things here like that to kind of just help pay it forward and work with people and stuff, just kind of help and answer as many questions. Anytime somebody messages me, I'm never going to tell them no. I'm not trying to get money out of them or whatever. I'll answer them to the best of my abilities and just kind of just help them just pay it forward like Glenn asked me to do. So
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that idea that you came onto a podcast, spoke for an hour, literally about how you program, and gave the juicy details of how you get people better. And I mean, you know, you're not going to see it. I'm not going to cut you a check or a sponsorship check or something like that, sadly.
Well, here's the deal. I mean, I give away everything, but like,
yeah,
you don't have me and how I implement it. Like, I am more than happy to give all this information. I'll share programs and stuff like that. But like, yeah, it's just paying it forward, man. There's too many people are all about like their secrets and this and that. There are no secrets. Strength and conditioning is dull and repetitive, and it's just how you it's just how you take what you know and implement it for the people that you work with. That's what makes it special.
Yeah, and that's actually because we had a podcast with Will Fleming the other day, and he talked about remote coaching, and it's really just about like conveying yourself as a coach to the athlete and getting them to know you, and that's kind of what they're paying for. It's like you said, a lot of this is similar between coaches, but you're getting the person themselves, how they interact with you. You enjoy their personality, you like them as a person, and like that makes it a viable and useful relationship versus, you know, just having a one-off program or something.
100%.
Awesome. Well, Tom, I appreciate your time. For everyone listening, go check out the Strength Agenda and all of the accounts that Tom listed. You can leave a review for the podcast. You can share it with your friends. You can, you know, honestly do whatever you'd like as long as you listen to it. But we appreciate your listen, and we will catch you guys on the next episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast.